And then I had the luxury of knowing individuals my age whose dads were Navy SEALs. And you get this impression that, they wake up and they drink ox blood and they just lift, crazy amounts of weights.
Meet this week's giant, Sam Blair, CEO of Valletta Industries and a former Navy SEAL officer.
And by the time Hell Week rolls around, I think it's just this steely reserve, just like, let's do this. There was probably 230 students. A year and a half later when we were graduating, there was 36 of us.
He's got over a decade of experience leading the most elite teams around the globe.
If you start showing up trying to be the genius in the room and not actually including the team, you're missing the boat. The leader of a SEAL platoon, you're kind of quarterbacking all these talented individuals and unleashing them and just saying, hey, look, here's the objective. I'm not going to tell you what to do, just go crush. Almost all of my buddies to a T have either started companies with one another or gone off on their own and been successful. They're all entrepreneurs.
Sam's entrepreneurial leadership and operational experience is coupled with academic honors and accolades with an MBA from Cornell University, an undergraduate degree in theology from the Franciscan University of Steubenville, a professional certification from Georgetown University, and an executive certification from MIT with a focus on building, leading, and sustaining the innovative organization.
I refuse to stay in a victim mentality. I gotta stand and fight for my honor and my family. That's how I did it, cause that's how it had to be. So now I'm slaying dragons and I do it happily. I told him I refuse to be another casualty. I looked inside the dragon's eyes and then I told him casually, hi, I'm a dragon slayer and I got a dragon lair. I'ma go and slay a dragon, then I'm gonna drag him there. I don't care, I ain't scared. Look inside my heart and there's a lion there. Conquering my dragons, I ain't fighting fair.
Hey Sam, it is great to be with you. You and I have had a chance to catch up over the past couple of days and just a couple of pre-conversations too. We have some common friends, but I love to have you on the show because one of the things we talk about in on Durand on Demand is we talk about becoming a giant and slaying dragons. And you are a man who is a giant and you literally are a dragon slayer. So that's pretty cool. I want to talk to you about your story in particular, because your story is a great story. First of all, thank you for your service. And then I want you to kind of fill in the blanks on, what's important about how that story shaped you. But if you don't mind, let's go back to when you were a young man and you were making a decision to enter into the military and why you chose the pursuit of trying to become, and then of course becoming, but most people it's trying, a Navy SEAL.
Sure. Well, I appreciate the compliment. I work with dragon slayers and legends, but I appreciate the kind words. But as far as entering the military, I grew up in a military family. Both my grandfathers were military officers. My dad was Naval Academy graduate, Marine pilot. My brother's a Marine pilot. And we moved around a lot because of that. So and we ended up, planting the flag in Coronado, California when I was in middle school, which is the home of the Navy SEALs. And so as a young boy, that's what I wanted to do. I saw the masculine figures in my life who were men I wanted to model my life after. And then I saw this incredible group that you hear stories about. There's like folklore growing up. And then I had the luxury of knowing individuals my age whose dads were Navy SEALs. And you get this impression that, they wake up and they drink ox blood and they just lift, crazy amounts of weights. But you realize these are average dudes that just have an iron constitution, that are incredible teammates and are mission focused. And it was kind of like peeking behind the curtain of Oz. You're like, oh, these are actually just men with an uncommon drive. And it distilled this myth. And I also had the luxury of a mother who was all about me being in the maritime domain. So I was a swimmer growing up. She made me play water polo, which I actually came to enjoy. And a lot of my buddies growing up, they were running mates since I was in middle school, so we were on the same swim team, same water polo team. We lifeguarded at the beach together. Well, Coronado water polo has this reputation of just producing SEALs. So our coach at the time, a guy named Randy Burgess, he had a 100% success rate. If you came from his program, played all 4 years, everyone that tried out for Buds made it. So I actually in addition to that, so my cohort, so that 4 years, there's 3 Olympians and 7 Navy SEALs. And so my teammates from high school were my teammates in my adult life, which is an absolute gift,
Did you know that Leading Giants has over 120 micro-learning modules from 4 to 19 minutes on entrepreneurship, communication, anything to maximize your influence? We are here to help you build the life of your dreams by maximizing your influence, growing a company, leading people at levels you've never led before. If you're in sales, having a greater opportunity for increased closing percentages and larger activity than you've ever had before. It's time now for you to jump in and join Leading Giants. All you have to do is press that button right down there. In order to access this, share with your friends, become a giant. We'll go slay some dragons. That's an amazing thing. I mean, there's an opposite saying, which is if you were born and raised in an insane asylum, would you know that you're insane? When all your friends are Olympians and Navy SEALs, do you know that you're that extraordinary? I mean, I think that's basically, super hyper performance was the norm for you in that setting. And that's intense. So that's a great backdrop. So now you make the decision, you enter, and people hear all sorts of stories about the training. I'd love to hear those because they really are great. The question, I mean, you were used to being wet, and if you liked the beach wet and sandy, probably helped you out. You were not afraid of endurance and all these things. But I want you to, when you tell your story, if you don't mind talking about when you saw good guys, strong men, tap out, as opposed to the guys that stuck it out. If there are some differences, because I think it's one thing to know, yes, if I do this, I can be on path. It's another thing to also recognize I'm starting to go off path, and I'm now starting to think like somebody who doesn't complete something. And that's not to diminish the efforts, okay, because everybody has a different natural strength too. But it is to know that some of those guys who tapped out shouldn't have.
Yeah.
Others maybe should have.
Yeah.
And I'm mostly interested in the ones that shouldn't have. So if you don't mind telling your story under the context of both those, that'd be great.
Yeah. So I had the luxury of, Naval Special Warfare is unique in that if you want to go to BUDS, you can enter as a 17, 18-year-old and go right through the pipelines, assuming you hit the basic minimum.
And for those people, when you say BUDS, that don't know what you mean by
So BUDS it's an acronym for Basic Underwater Demolition School. So it's a shout out to the old underwater demolition teams of World War II, Korea. In 1962, JFK, he made the Green Berets and the Navy SEALs. So this was his initiative. The tradition has it that the SEALs actually had blue berets, but were, fashion conscious, so we ditched those. So we don't have those anymore. I don't know if we even had it for a year. But the training goes back to World War II days. And so when you see the instructors, it's Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training. So that's the acronym. SEAL stands for Sea, Air, and Land, which are the different insertion methods to accomplish the mission. So I had the luxury of going to college, maturing a little bit, both physically, mentally. And then right after college, I did a stint working up in Alaska as a net setter for a captain who was absolutely insane. And I got cussed out every day, like worse than any instructor could throw at me, like that. And then in addition to Randy Burgess, who was an awesome individual in the rearview mirror, but as a teenager, was like, man, this guy is crazy. And you came to find out that guy loved you and he's in your corner. So those experiences. And then I went from Alaska to Africa. I was working with the Missionaries of Charity out in Ethiopia. And I just saw some heinous things as a young man. And I would say I'm idealistic. I don't think that's changed. And I think that combined with where we were geopolitically at the time, my desire as a 7-year-old that's never left me to join the military. I was like, I want to do something bigger than myself. And I looked at the SEALs, the best trained, best equipped. I was like, I'm going to join these guys. And there's that water component, which I felt comfortable in. And so when I joined, I went to Officer Candidate School, came to BUDS, and I was 24. So a 17-year-old versus a 24-year-old, there's a huge difference. There are some absolute studs when you're 18, but I do think you're in your peak as a male between somewhere like 24 to 32.
Oh, that's like the difference between college and pro athletes.
100%. Yep. And so when I showed up, there was probably 230 students, and I would say 90% of them were physically able to make it through the training. That wasn't the case because when, a year and a half later when we were graduating, there's 36 of us. So it whittled down really quickly. And
how many you said started?
Over 200. It was like 220. So the large.
Yeah. So percentage wise, you're looking at 13, 14% of the people.
Yeah. And there's some caveats to that. Some individuals get medically rolled and would make it, the class behind. So it's a low percentage rate. But I think the caveat or the differentiator isn't necessarily the physical component, which again, there's plenty of studs and physical specimens showing up. I think it came down to the mental aspect of the training. And a lot of individuals, if you break out and isolate each evolution, there's plenty of painful days and buds, plenty of them. But I think people would always ask, what's the hardest part of training? It's not one evolution, although people have their favorites and they can point to them. It's the fact that all of these get stacked over a period of time. And when you start looking out over the horizon and start saying, wow, how am I going to do this for months on end? You can start getting inside your own head. And the next thing you know, you're looking for a place to quit quietly away from your team. And that's what happens. No one quits in the moment. There might be like one or two. Everyone that I knew that quit would do it at a meal, like at chow hall, or before an evolution started. So they would psych themselves out before an evolution started, or after an evolution when they're eating a meal, and they knew that there's another painful moment coming right around the corner. They're like, I'm done. And so they wouldn't do it in the moment and that was interesting to me because when you look at the psychology of that, all it comes down to is living in the moment, and one thing at a time. You can't do 6 months out. You can't even do 6 weeks out or 6 days. You can do right now. You can't do 6 hours. You can do right now, and just knocking down what's in front of you, going all in. And that's what the training required showing up in force, all in, all the time. And you can only do that by resetting and focusing moment to moment. And that's the genius of it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So let me ask you a question. Was it ever a choice for you to not finish? Like, I mean, I know there's injuries and things like that even when somebody chooses that they would have stayed, knock them out. But for you, were you like, I am just doing this? Or were you thinking, I wonder if I will do this?
Yeah, for me, there is no backup plan. I was so stoked to be there. It's something I wanted to do since I was 7. And then I also think there's the component which, as a pro, I guess you could also see it as a con. But for me, the pro was I had an inside look at what was going on, since I was a kid. The con being I wasn't going to be the local kid that tried out for buds and didn't make it. I just didn't want to be that guy. So for me, it was just like burn the ships. Let's go for this. And I wanted to do the job,
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. We just interviewed Alan Webb, who held the United States record for the mile for like 16 years. He ran a 3:46. There's a 36-year standing record when he was in high school. He broke that. And I was talking about, he went pro with Nike and all that. And I said, well, did you have injuries? Did you have setbacks? And he goes, yeah. And I said, well, what's the difference between you, who kept running, and the guy who is sitting here saying, well, I could have kept running, but I had a pulled hamstring, which you had, and all these different things. And he said, well, I just, I didn't have a choice. This is absolutely what I was going to do. And it's interesting. I mean, he was running, not saving the country, but you were out there as a aspiring SEAL, and you had the same type of mentality. I think there's a pretty common thing there. Okay. So go on with the rest of your story.
Yeah. So I think this sense of like, hey, I'm here, stoked to be here. And that the first week, so they break up the training into 3 different phases. You have first phase, which gets, that's notorious. I'm sure there's a lot of stories out there on buds and first phase. That's where Hell Week is. It's usually held the 3rd week and it's probably changed since I went through. And the goal there is to just get as many people that want to be there into the cohort as soon as possible so they can start investing in you. And so those first 3 weeks, you start with big numbers and you get down to a small class really quickly because they just want to know like who's going to play, who wants to do the job, or who wants to, walk around town with a trident on their chest saying, I'm a Navy SEAL. And so that first week, I remember getting to a Friday and I got back to my house. And I was like, man, I felt like I just rustled a saber tooth. Like I've never seen a saber tooth tiger, but if I had to rustle one and do a knife, like that's what it felt like. And I was like, I don't know if I can do another week of that, but your body conditions. And I was pumped for the challenge of the 24. Like, let's go do it. Let's go rustle a saber tooth again. And by the time Hell Week rolls around, I think it's just this steely reserve, just like, let's do this, and there's that excitement. It's a mystery. You hear your buddies that have gone through it. And the only way that you can actually experience it is to go through it. And so that time came and you're just like, a lot of it, Dave, I forgot, because you're running on limited sleep. Your brain is just like there. I can remember pieces of it, but you're through it.
That is brutal. Okay. So a couple of different things. Now you make it through. There's a whittling away of the number of people. So you recognize that you're coming toward the end of that, which is really a beginning. And you now find yourself in leadership in a short period of time. What was that like? What was it like leading these sorts of guys? I imagine they came from all different walks of life, and there were a lot of things that were like great equalizers, but then somebody's in charge. And how do you lead guys like that? What challenges were there? How did you keep spirits up? What are any stories that come to mind?
Yeah, there's a lot. I don't know if all of them are worth sharing for the audience, but I think
the audience is pretty open to good stories and stories that kind of exhibit what it's like to be in a man bubble.
Well, I think the biggest thing that the training stresses is that it's SEAL teams. So everything is done in a team setting, and you have to work together. You could be an individual stud, but if you get on a log with 6 other dudes, now you have to work with them to accomplish a mission. If you have a boat on your head and you have to do squats, you have to do that in timing. There's communication and short burst communication. And it's not to make people feel like there's not gentle words, like there's short expletives. And it's not because I don't like the individual. It's because, hey man, we need to do this fast. People are going to get injured if we don't cooperate and sync. And you realize, there's an element of teamwork that starts developing. There's that bond, there's pain, there's suffering, and there's also deep friendship that starts happening at an early stage, because you start looking beneath the character of the man, because you see them clearly in their pain and their suffering, and you see that they still are showing up in force. And you're like, man, this is the kind of friend I want. And all of those guys were diamonds in the rough, full of natural virtue, great, solid dudes. And that's a general.
So what you're saying is that you weren't using DEI as your standard for whether or not they became your friend? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Wow. What did you use instead? What possibly could be used instead of that?
Metrics.
Competency,
trust, showing up on time, right gear, right attitude, all those things that are foundational for having a good teammate, being a good teammate, leading.
Yeah.
And then as things kind of developed, I want to share something here. Like when I first checked in, I had like a Forrest Gump moment. They gave me a dive knife,
a box of chocolate. Oh, I'm sorry.
They gave me an actuator for what's called an UDT Life Vest. It's CO2 cartridge. You pull it in the event that your life jacket needs to inflate, and then you get a couple issued pairs of boots. They're like, hey, make sure these are shiny. On top of all of these physical evolutions. And, you get more and more gear as training goes on. But those first days, I remember going home thinking like, man, how am I going to keep my rune clean, my knife sharp, my actuator clear of rust, and my boots shiny? There's a lot going on, And you like look at Forrest Gump when Lieutenant Dan's like, keep your socks, keep your feet dry and don't do something stupid like get yourself killed. And they're like, man, I hope I don't let him down. I had that moment. And then fast forward 2 years, now I'm in the teams and you're leading men, managing millions of dollars, the administrative piece of the component being an officer and making sure people's pay and awards and all this stuff is on track. And I look back on this, it's like, I was worried about a dive knife, but all of this stuff builds, these experiences build on one another. And I think the other thing I'd like to say there about leading these guys is it was an absolute privilege and one of my favorite times in life. And you realize really quickly that rank, although it's important, is like the bare minimum of leadership. You show up and you're like, well, I'm an ensign in the United States Navy. They're like, I don't care. Like, I don't care what your GPA was. I don't care about your socioeconomic background. I don't care about, what your major was. I don't care what sport you played. I just want to know, like, are you a good dude? Are you looking out for us? Do you know what you're doing? Are you competent at the job? And you find out really quickly, almost all of these SEALs have, not only do they have college degrees, but a lot of them have masters. And you're not the smartest guy in the room. And so if you start showing up trying to be the genius in the room and not actually including the team and the input and relying on your tactical lead, a seasoned chief, like you're realizing like you're missing the boat. And so being part of a SEAL team is I think a lot different than being maybe a second lieutenant in charge of a Marine platoon where you're like, you have to be everything. You got to be the point man. You got to be the radio man. You got to be the JTAC. You got to be like doing everything. Whereas the leader of a SEAL platoon, you're kind of quarterbacking all these talented individuals and unleashing them and just saying, hey, look, here's the objective. I'm not going to tell you what to do. Just go crush. Like, here's kind of the overarching, stay in these left and right limits. And I think the other thing about these guys is they're all incredibly talented. And they want you to know three things. They want you to know they're not a machine. They're not a number. They're not an animal. And I think they're all entrepreneurial focused. It's almost all of my buddies to a T have either started companies with one another or gone off on their own and been successful. They're all entrepreneurs. There's like a few that maybe went to like McKinsey or Bain to start off, but almost all of them got into the startup space or entrepreneurial space, which doesn't surprise me because the mission is like, hey, we're going to give you little guidance. We're going to just drop you off. Here's more or less what we're trying to achieve. Go figure it out. And the SEALs do it. And they do a bang up job because all of those guys are problem solvers. And they figured out like, okay, what do we need to do? We need one step at a time. What do we need to achieve? And they start ordering things. They have a disciplined mindset and they've got teamwork, short burst communication, and they just go crush. And all these guys will show up. And this is probably unique, not just to NATO Special Warfare. You probably see this in the Green Berets and Rangers. But no one has the same gear. Like we all have the same issued gear, but guys will show up and they'll be wearing different shoes or they'll arrange their kit differently. They'll have, different cutoff. Maybe someone have cutoff sleeves. Like everyone wants you to know I'm unique. I'm a team player, but I'm not a robot that's just going to get in line. And when you give them autonomy, when you give them space and you recognize their talents and you unleash those talents, it makes it look too easy. You're just like, you don't feel like you're doing much because all you're doing is saying like, hey, here's more or less what we're trying to achieve. And I'm unleashing you, and those guys, if you give them that space, they're going to just make you look like a rock star.
Giants, we need your help with something. The world desperately needs more giants like you. Head over to Apple Podcasts and give this podcast a 5-star rating so we can build an army of giants and go slay dragons together.
I mean, the unique blend of humility on both the leader and them is, they know they're intelligent. They might even know they're more intelligent than the lead, but they've got the humility to be in order.
Yeah.
And they're more intelligent sometimes. And so you are unafraid of elevating their authority within the group in order to make decisions. So that's a pretty fascinating thing. I think about the entrepreneurial side of things. People, first of all, let me just overtly come out and say what you did as a SEAL and what any Navy SEAL does compared to any heroics in the rest of our lives, including my own, just they seem paltry. I want to put that out there. But people consider me a risk taker. I've been in martial arts my life. I'm a pilot. I've always run businesses. And they say, well, you're a risk taker. You're not afraid. So, well, I'm really, yes, I suppose, but I've never really thought of being a pilot as a risk taker because I do all the calculated measurements to reduce fear. When I run a business, I guess you could look at it that way, but I really don't ever feel like I'm taking a big risk because I've calculated that. What is your, because the example is a SEAL that you could give is way bigger than what I've provided there. How did readiness reduce fear? A. B, it doesn't eliminate it. So when you were in the face of it, how did you and the guys handle that?
So there's a couple things to this. Like one, readiness is like foundational, and answering that question is, it's incredibly important. But I think the other thing is understanding that I don't have to do, I understand basics of medicine, but I'm not the medic. I understand basics of communication, but I'm not the RTO or the radio man. I understand the basics of joint terminal air traffic controlling, but I'm not the JTAC. I understand the basics of being a sniper, but I'm not a sniper. I understand the basics of breaching, but I'm not the breacher. So I can touch those things and I can speak intelligently to them, but I also know I'm not the expert there. So understanding and bringing the team into the problem solving versus trying to be the genius in the room, now those guys are invested in it. So a lot of this, when you come down to mission planning, it's not just Sam's good idea. It's, hey, here's the target. What do we think about this, you know? And so now you get input, buy-in. That's huge. And then one of the things that I love about naval special warfare is they stack the odds in their favor. So everything, the surprise, the speed, the violence, that's trained. Like, we understand that those things are necessary because we're not there to stay in place for a long period of time. We're going there, achieve a mission, and get out. We're not trying to go toe to toe with a bigger force. We're trying to do things like a scalpel and precision. And we understand that we have better training. We're not better than other people. Like, I think if you have this idea when you come out of naval special warfare, you're in this bubble and you get this trident, you're like, look at me, I'm a Navy SEAL. That's not the attitude you want to have. You're just a piece of a bigger pie, which is Department of Defense, and there's Air Force and Navy and Army and Marine Corps, and we're all working together to achieve an end result at a time of war or conflict. And we have a piece of that. We're not the saviors of the United States of America. We're just a piece of this. And so understanding what your job is, being good at your job, and being known that you can be counted on. Okay, great. That's our role. And so when it comes to, readiness, sure, that reduces fear. When it comes to tactics, having everyone's buy-in, so it's not just relying on one individual source for a good idea, that reduces fear. Understanding that there's seasoned individuals at varying levels of experience in your platoon that are providing their input, huge. And I think all of this builds on itself too. That experience in a platoon, if I could, I'd just like to share two stories. One, kind of going back to training. When I got out of training, I went to a SEAL team on the West Coast, and the first day you're in your gear, they call it dress blue, so your, lack of a better word, your fancy uniform, and you're showing up. And I remember my first day at the team, the warfighters had just gotten back from deployment. And they were getting awarded for all of their escapades downrange and their valor. And so here I am as a new guy. I've done nothing, other than training for the last year and a half, going through training. And I'm in the back with all these warfighters, like alpha males. And they go, hey, we got 5 new guys. Why don't we just come up and we'll introduce them to everybody? And I went first just because of my last name starts with a B. And so I'm first up. And I'm standing in front of like 70 warfighters. And I go, hey, everyone, I'm Sam. My favorite color, I don't know what I say, like favorite color is blue. And the next thing I know, like all of them are on their feet just yelling, shut up. I was like, oh, okay. So I like stopped talking and they sit down, and I was like, anyways, and I start telling more about myself, and they like lose their mind. Like, man, this guy's a slow learner. You know, what they're trying to highlight is we don't care. You know, like, you're a new guy. You might think you're somebody because you have a trident on your chest, but guess what? So do we. And we don't get to walk around with this outside of this compound. So hopefully you like to do the job, you know, and now it's time to train. And that was like seared into my brain. Like, oh, wow, it's train, and then train some more, go deploy, come back 2 weeks off, and you just keep training. And that's all we did. Like, that was the life. And I did that life for close to a decade of just train. And so that builds confidence. But when you're working with guys that love to train and love their profession, love their craft, and are good at it, and you get to step into the ranks with them, I mean, that also reduces fear. You're like, these guys are all studs, all of them. And they're teaching me the craft. And that's a strong group. I would not want to face a platoon of Navy SEALs. I mean, working together, no. At their peak.
Yeah. I mean, that's amazing. Yet they're all men. So when you get in it, I would imagine that there's a time where some of the training just takes over at such a level that the pushing aside of fear. Like, I've read some studies on fear in the military, and even well-trained guys, and they're surprised by their own reaction, whether it be calm, panic, freezing, whatever it might be. And that moment is what either keeps them alive or gets them killed quite often, or their buddy next to them. What did you see? How did you see guys respond to fear? And as a leader, what did you do? And in the calm moments of that, you know, it's not that the battle's always taking place. There's preparation. Levity, I've learned, is an interesting thing. That, like, in the midst of an intense circumstance, there was quite comedic things taking place to kind of bond the guys. Just talk a little bit about these relationships between these emotions to calm them and whatnot.
Yeah, humor is actually it's big, and it starts in training. Like, it's encouraged by the instructors, it's encouraged by the classmates, because it's a pressure relief valve. There's so much stress, duress, adversity, pain, so all of that when you can have a moment of levity and humor, it almost puts things in perspective in a way that, like, oh man, look at this situation. This is like so ridiculous. It's funny. And I have a hard time sharing some of those stories, you know, in backyard conversations or barbecues, because it can also be dark humor. You know, it's like people,
yeah.
I think it's hilarious. And people are like, man, this guy, you know, I just want to highlight that humor is paramount, and it's prized too. People love being around funny dudes. And I look back on Buds, and yeah, it was painful, but I also look back, I laughed so much, Dave. I laughed a ton, because
well, you can't say some of these stories run the risk of crossing the line and just not tell us. You got to tell us at least one.
Sure, I'll tell you one. And then I think, to answer your other question though, on, you know, what have you seen? Here's the thing. Like, I don't want to talk a ton about my experience. There are so many guys that I worked with that there'll never be a movie about them, books about them, stories about their story will never be told. And there are you talk about giants. It's not me. The giants are in the community, still walking around in uniform, and no one will ever know their heroics. And I'll just give you one example. When I was a junior officer, we were, you know, the military is big on professional development. And so you'll have seasoned officers, maybe that just got off a deployment. They'll come and they'll share an after action or lessons learned. And it's just to help the community at large get better, sharpen the blade, and continue in our craft and development. Well, one of these officers came back, and he had shared drone footage from an operation that he was leading. And I had shared earlier that, you know, speed, violence of action, surprise, all of those help in stacking the odds so that when a platoon shows up or a troop of SEALs, they're running the town. Everything is in their favor. Well, when this hostage rescue was going down, the gig was up, and the enemy had basically pinned down this platoon, and they were in a ditch and just unable to maneuver. And the video footage shows in the midst of this withering fire, two guys stand up and they just take a move and they start moving towards the target and start laying down rounds. And then the whole platoon gets online and just starts crushing the enemy to the point where the enemy stops shooting because their heads go down, and they get to the target, overwhelm the target, crush the target, do their thing and get out. And when they were doing the after action, the officer was sharing, they're going around the room and they're commending, they're like, man, so-and-so, that guy just stood up and took action. And he's like, I did it because I thought so-and-so stood up. And so at some point, they just encourage each other. And this idea that you can sit there and take heavies, or you can just make a move in a bad situation. And that sort of courage. And then once one guy made a move, everyone's like, and they just started going to crush. And that sort of stuff, you look at it as like, that's just what SEALs do. Maybe. I think that's learned behavior, and that's being part of a team. Like, this is what the team's doing. This is what's expected. We can't stay here forever. We got to make a move, in a bad situation.
Yeah, that's, again, courage is normalized. And you see that sort of thing. By the way, you have done a couple of things, because a big part of our audience is entrepreneurs. And, you said these guys go on to be entrepreneurs quite often. And when you were just laying out what it means to lead, hey, you don't have to know, you don't have to be the JTech, you don't have to be, the medic, et cetera, et cetera. Of course. But you need to know a little bit about each one of these things. That's a CEO. You don't have to know about every department. You just have to have an intelligent conversation with them and then let that person take that lead. And then the same thing you said about courage, like somebody's got to step up there and say, this is going to be okay. And, again, the corporate world, you're not standing up and actually having an enemy try to kill you, but you have competitors and whatnot. And you have to stand up and say, hey, we can handle this sort of thing. But you kind of left this hanging. What did you see that was funny?
Well, I think this goes back to leadership too. So, and I tell about rank. So when I feel like I've over told this story, but it's one of my favorites because it's one that will never leave me in life. This is so impactful and at the same time so ridiculous. But 6 months into the military, I'm a boat crew leader, boat crew 2. This is like second week into BUDS. Whole week hasn't even started. It's a Wednesday, and all the boat crews are lined up facing the Pacific Ocean, and the instructor for this one particular evolution is like, hey, all the boat crew leaders bring it in. So the boat crew leaders bring it in, and we're told what the next evolution is going to be. So like, all right, so I'm trying to memorize, like, we're going to go paddle out. We're going to turn south. After 500 yards, we're going to, bring it into the beach. We're going to low carry this boat, put it up on our heads after we get over a dune, blah, blah, blah. And then the race will be secure. And they emphasize it pays to win. Because if you don't win, there's more pain coming. If you win, you get to rest. So I go back. I've probably got 3 minutes to download this information to my boat crew of 7, BUD students. And the boat crews are designed so like it's height levels. So all these guys are my height. I'm about 6'2", and there's some stout dudes. Some of them are like 6'3", just big dudes. And I'm like going down, and I still think, Dave, that I'm somebody because I'm an ensign in the Navy, and I'm a boat crew leader in charge of 7 dudes, and I'm going through the race, and then all my buddies in unison start laughing at me. I'm like, what is so funny about this? And I look down, and my buddy to my right is urinating on my leg while I'm breathing. I'm like, what is going on? Like, I'm an officer in the Navy, and I was totally unprepared for that move. And so
who would have been prepared?
So I just started urinating on his leg, but all the time I knew I only had so much time. So I'm just like going down the list. He's cracking up. I'm cracking up. We're all cracking up. And then, they're like, hey, the race starts. We're like, buttoning up our pants and like running. We end up winning this thing. And I think from that moment, the guys were just trying to show me like, look, we appreciate that you're an officer. That's great. But you've been in the Navy like 6 weeks. You're our age. Like, we'll take care of you, but don't tout yourself as an officer. And at that, it was very humbling for me to realize, like, okay, and then it made me to like reach for other tools other than rank when it came to leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great story.
I'm a vice president. People are like, great, I can pin like vice president on a donkey. Doesn't mean that you're talented, you know?
Exactly.
Hey there, Giant. Dave Durand here, and I want to invite you to subscribe to our brand new e-newsletter where you will get the best of the best tips and insights to unlock the giant in you, build an empire, and slay some dragons. Sign up below. Let's go slay some dragons.
Yeah, exactly. It's like when people say, you need to respect me.
Right.
No, I don't.
Right.
No, that will be earned, and I will wait. You know, it's also when people shake your hand and they say, trust me. I'm usually a little bit more skeptical of that person than I am the person that says, I want to earn your trust. So we're bumping up toward the end of this. I wish I had you for like another hour or so because you've provided so many great nuggets here. But in the last, 3-4 minutes, what would you want to share with an audience? Let's say you're talking to somebody that's 35 years old. They feel like they need to make a change in life. They're not exactly where they want to be. Maybe they're wondering if they should be an entrepreneur or take a risk or make a job move. Well, what advice would you have to that person about making decisions and doing it in a courageous fashion?
I think starting with the end goal in mind has always been helpful for me. Just understanding, like, where do I want to be? Because then you can start planning and calculating, and you can start orientating towards that end state versus just saying, yeah, I want to achieve this in 5 years. Great. But ultimately, I'd go further down the road. Like, what does that look like? And for me, I think it's heaven. So making sure like everything is lined up there and everything's in line with my core value system. It's getting my family to heaven. So making sure that they're thriving, they're happy, we have time, space, all of those things. And then it's like, okay, well, how do I achieve that? Resources. So how do I achieve that? Crushing business. How do I crush in business? And then just start pulling those onions back and having those strategies that end up with that end state. I think the other thing is, I just share these last two pieces. This is coming from a guy named Alex Howard, which I love. He talks about humility and magnanimity. And humility is understanding that all of our gifts and talents come from God. And magnanimity is a summation of those gifts, like Aristotle talks about, and that we do have those gifts and talents and to use them. And I think a lot of times Christians of any denomination, we have humility down packed, but we think, there's this reluctance to actually enter the city square and leverage those gifts and talents for not only the glory of God, but for our community, our family, and to be out there chest out, leveraging the God-given gifts and talents we've been given. And I think to hold back, especially if you're 35 and you have an inclining to a specific domain or industry or a desire to be an entrepreneur, I'd say go for it. And part of that is knowing God is good. So there's that. God put that desire in your heart. I would look at that seriously, because I think the temptation there is comfort and saying, well, I could also just stick with this path because it's comfortable, it's known, even though my dreams are over here. And I think a lot of times people don't pursue those because there's this reluctance to make that move. And I related back to the story I shared earlier. You can sit there and be like, yeah, I'm comfortable right now, but you're taking heavies. Or you can achieve the end state and get up and start making a move.
Yeah. And by the way, I think that is that humility. I mean, if you're Michael Jordan and, there's 3 seconds left and you're down by 2 and they want you to take the shot, it's not humility to say, let Rodman do it. I mean, it is humility to say, I'm going to do this no matter what happens, no matter what failure is there, I'm going to do it. I think a lot of people have a false humility.
Right.
And that false humility they use to hide behind their pride, which is to say, if I don't want to look silly, I don't want to make the mistake, and my pride prevents me from actually getting in the game, and I bury my talents. You provided so much insight. I know I'm going to bring you back. There's no doubt about it, on what we're doing here, because there's a lot of additional layers. We even talked about your success as a business executive and as an entrepreneur. We want to talk about that. You've been able to take a business from start to finish to exit. You've run other companies too. You help a lot of men in their faith in order to achieve things the right way with the right order. So we're very grateful, and I'm grateful for our audience. You have been able to listen to a giant. He doesn't call himself a giant. He wants to tell other people's stories, and he talks about how other people slay dragons, but he knows how to do that himself. So if you like today's show, make sure you do like it. You hit that like button. You share the button. Be sure to comment too. And I'm going to encourage you, if you wouldn't mind, to go to our podcast on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify and give us a 5-star review there as well. And we're going to be back next week with another great guest. Until then, go be a giant and slay some dragons. Hey there, giant. Thanks for watching Durand On Demand. I need your help with something. The world desperately needs more giants. You know it, and I know it. We've been around a lot of people struggling, figuring out how to make things go. So hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, share this with as many people as you can. We're going to build this audience, and we're going to help people slay dragons together.